Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We're going to just stick with the pulpit mic. That other one did not work last week. Good to see you here. I mentioned that already earlier. I just want you to know it's exciting. I've been here 21 years now at Central. That seems like a long time for somebody that's only 25. But anyway, it's just a great thing. It's a great place to be. If you want to stay young forever, just stay here forever. What a blessed, wonderful congregation. Each and every person, visitors, you make up a good part of that this morning. We just got through reading Isaiah chapter 40. Jackson, you did a great job. I like having our young men up here doing that each morning. Just reminds us that we've got to keep carrying on the things we've done. We read from Isaiah 40, and that wonderful passage that challenges each one of us. He gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might, and we probably raise our hands to that half the time, to those who have no might, he increases strength. And that final part there, talking about, we shall mount up with wings like eagles. Don't you want to do that? I certainly do. And I've got to confess, probably you might feel the same, that I'm not always there. And I wonder what the holdup is, because God's there to do His part. So what's the holdup? Well, look, it's got to be me, doesn't it? We're just not there. And I was looking back through all of these things here, and it comes down to one word, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. The word surrender. Tie in now with this Isaiah passage, because we want to get there. God's saying, I will do these things for you. And we're looking at what's going on with Isaiah and the passage. The context of it is that in verse 27, half of Israel saying, but Lord, you're not with us. It doesn't seem like. My way's hidden from you. And so God says, why do you say that? Why do you think your way's hidden? This is what God's willing to do. And the fact is, Israel hadn't surrendered, really, at all. And so Isaiah, this great prophet, then is telling them, this is what God is willing to do if you'll just get your life straight. Now let's look over in the New Testament. Turn to 2 Corinthians for just a moment here. And we're going to look at a passage that the Apostle Paul spoke, and his wrestling with that whole basic same issue here. As he's talking previous to in this chapter, in verses 7, he talks about a thorn in the flesh. Lots of speculation been done about what that might be. Whatever it is, it's something that troubles Paul. Enough that he prayed fervently to try to get rid of that thing. A lot of other things he dealt with, but this was something he felt like he just needed to get rid of. Now, he'd been persecuted, he'd been in prison, he dealt with all kinds of things, but this was his big issue. And he prayed about it. I can't imagine what it must have been, but it was big. And then verse 8, concerning this thing, he says, I pleaded 3 times with the Lord that it depart. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For my strength, God now speaking to Paul, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Whoever's weakness, Paul, I'm talking to you right now, it's your weakness, but if he's talking to us today, and he is, then it's my weakness. Therefore, Paul continues writing, therefore, most gladly I would rather boast about my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And then he really goes overboard, as he says in verse 10, therefore I take pleasure. I'm not sure how excited he was about it, but he says, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses. The reason he can take pleasure, the last part, for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Now there's an enigma in itself, if that's the right word to use. Because Paul's really laying it out there and getting us to understand that even in our weakest state, when we recognize that's where we are, that's when God can really do what He wants to do with us and through us. And so this Isaiah 40 passage about these people, oh, I feel like you've left me, God. God says, well, this is my part. Well, the thing is, they haven't surrendered. Because if they'll just realize where they are in relationship to God and surrender everything, then God can do something right with them. We were reading in the Bible class here this morning from 1 Timothy, and it talked about Paul writing, and he said that God enables me to do the things. And I looked at the Greek word in that some time ago and penned it in there, and so there it was written. And the word comes from the Greek word with a little adjective on the front part of it, but the Greek word, the root is dunamis, the same word we use in Romans 1:16, or Paul does, when he talks about the gospel being God's power of God unto salvation. That dunamis is the power. God's dynamite, in other words, and that's where we get the word dynamite from. And God now saying, I'm going to empower you, Timothy, to help you do. So God's doing His part, and He's capable of doing it if we'll just surrender. And that's the issue, surrendering. The basic heart of Christianity is surrendering. Let's look over what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 25, or rather chapter 16. Excuse me. Not used to that pulpit mic being on when I turn pages here. Matthew 16. Jesus in verses 21 to 23 predicts His death to the apostles. Now He's done this before, and He'll continue to do that. And as He's doing this, on the follow-up of that, He looks at them and He says to His disciples in verse 24, and if anyone desires to come after me, if you want to really be my disciple, and that's what it means, a follower, learner, if you desire to come after me, let him deny himself. In other words, surrender himself and take up his cross and follow me. Where did Jesus ultimately surrender everything? On the cross. He's laying out a measurement for us to say, this is what I'm going to be doing. Now, if you want to understand what Christianity is about, it's a life of surrendering yourself, denying yourself in every way. And then he goes on to say in verse 25, Jesus does, for whoever desires to save his life, to really live it to the fullest, in other words, he'll lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. There's that enigma again. You want it? You can't have it. But if you don't worry about it, you got it. But he's not talking about just this life, but he's talking about when you're pursuing everything out there that this life tends to offer to exploit us and use us. Really, that's what Satan's doing. If you'll just realize that's not where it's at, then you really will find eternal life with me. So it's not really an enigma. It's two different lives being discussed here. There was a fellow, Matthew writes in chapter 19 about him, just a few pages away from here, who came to Jesus, thought he had it together. In verse 16, he comes to Jesus and he says, good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? Well, he thought he had a good life. So he comes to Jesus, and Jesus is a good teacher. But it's interesting how Jesus responds to him. Verse 17, Jesus says to him, why do you call me good? I'm thinking, or about this time, everybody's looking at Jesus. Well, it's the appropriate thing. Who else would you call good? I know a lot of good people. Good people that teach class, and good people that sacrifice, and good people that are song leaders or work at the student center, and good people that take food, and all kinds of good things. They're good people. Surely if you come to Jesus and say, good Lord, He is the Lord that's good. But he starts right there with this issue of good. Why do you call me good? There's no one that is good but God. And then he goes on and he talks about these commandments, and there's a little back and forth between this rich guy and Jesus about it. And in essence, basically, Jesus says, have you kept the commandments? And the guy said, yeah, I've done that. In other words, I have been good. But let's just, is there anything else? And you get down in verse 21, and Jesus says to him, if you want to be perfect, go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And then come follow me. It's interesting what Matthew writes as the man's response, the next verse. When the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. He had all kinds of things. And it was in his way. It was excess baggage, basically, is what's going on here. You ever been to the airport and you see these people that are checking in and they've got excess baggage? You know what I'm talking about? And they want to use it all as a carry-on, by the way. You can't get down the aisle of an airplane carrying excess baggage. It's really hard to follow Jesus when you've got all that excess baggage in your life. Surrender it is the point that Jesus is saying. Dump all that stuff, and then you'll be able to follow me. Because all of that gets in the way, you see. And that's the point that Jesus was making to this rich young ruler here. It wasn't that each one of us is to turn over every penny we've got and do whatever, because there are going to be times that he's going to want us to use that in his kingdom. Besides taking care of our family and a few things. But if it's keeping you from following him, whatever it is, it becomes excess baggage. You know, the apostles left everything just to start on the journey of following Jesus. They got rid of the baggage. They had a lot of things and jobs, and right then they needed to devote absolutely everything. You see, the heart of Christianity is being able to surrender whatever it is that gets in your way between you following Jesus and not. And it can be any number of things, not just necessarily physical things. I talked with a couple of gentlemen some years ago, and it was at a denominational group, and they were really bothered. They came up to me, and a bit older than I was, and I was kind of impressed. They come and asked me for the answer to this question. They said, "We know you don't have this problem where you're at. We've got a problem at our church." And they began to tell me about it. We've been sent, the way their denomination works, so they don't have a minister they choose. We've been sent a woman to lead our congregation. We don't think that's right. She's supposed to be standing up and preaching on Sunday, and she's homosexual. And they said, "We know you don't have that where you're at. What do you do to keep from getting that point?" And I said, "Well, you go back to the Bible and you follow it and nothing else." Can't do that. And like the rich young ruler, they went away kind of sad. They knew that was a good decision, but they just couldn't go that far. And they went away sorrowful. Like the rich young ruler, who knew that really was what he needed to do, but he just couldn't make himself go that far. And yet, that is indeed exactly what Jesus is asking. I want your all. I want you to surrender. Because whatever it is, if it's thinking, it's philosophy, it's teaching, it's materialism, whatever it is, it becomes excess baggage to you obeying God's will, you see. It's a daily event, this surrendering. And also involved in that is Satan, of course. You know he's there. And he's daily pushing all kinds of things in front of you to give you whatever it is to distract you, to take you away. It's kind of like if you have this severe case of diabetes and he's pushing jelly donuts your direction. I'll just take a bite. It's going to taste good. You don't take it, he'll come back at you in the afternoon again. And he'll keep on and keep on. He'll plant anything in our way that will keep us from surrendering ourselves to Jesus. Surrender, the point. Now here's the thing. God uses surrendered people. I think of that Old Testament passage in the book of Judges. What a name for a book in the Bible, but nonetheless, it really is about a soldier. His name was Gideon in chapter 7 of the book of Judges. And he's supposed to go out and conquer this land. And of course, when you go, you want to have an army with you. Well, he had 32,000 people. So God comes up to Gideon in verse 2 of chapter 7 of Judges. And the Lord said to Gideon, "These who are with you are too many for me to give Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claims glory for itself against me." So therefore, he says, comes to Gideon with a little bit of a test. He says, just tell anybody who really doesn't want to go, they can go home. Well, Gideon's getting the word out among the 32,000 people, but I'm sure it was a sad day for that soldier who was in charge of that army, because 22,000 left. with 10,000 guys, and I'm sure being a soldier of times past, you kind of like to go with as many guys as you can, and Gideon lost well over half. But those weren't the surrendered people. Still had 10,000. Gideon's thinking, okay, got 10,000, we'll manage it. God comes back again in the rest of this passage, and he says, still too many. Oh, no, wait a minute, Lord, let's think about this a bit. That's a pretty big crowd, and they're big people and fortified cities. We've done this route before in the studies, and no, but still too many. Okay, so he plants this new idea here. When they go down and drink the water now from the river when they're taking a break, he said, I want to select the guys that still have their eye ahead of them. They still keep a sword in their hand, and I've been down, and they're going to reach in the water with their hand. They're going to lap up a little bit of water, and they're going to keep their eyes looking around because they're soldiers. And those guys that just drop all their equipment and just get down in the water and drink from all fours like a dog, get rid of them. And then Gideon ends up with 300. I'm sure that was an encouraging moment for Gideon, and yet when the victory was won, it was encouraging because with 300 surrendered people, surrendered to God, their army won and didn't surrender to the armies. God uses surrendered people to do His will. That 2 Corinthians passage that we were reading about Paul, when he figured out what was going on, and God said, I'm going to leave you with this problem. We're not taking it away. I want you to know when you're weak, then you're strong. And then Paul said, okay, I'll be happy about that. Just use me. God's saying, okay, now I can use you because you're willing to surrender yourself. Each one of us. You see, whatever age it is, wherever we're at in our walk with life, God says surrender. Turn it over. Get it out of the way between you and me. Then you're going to be able to follow like you need to. Surrender, this idea of surrender, really comes down to trusting God. We've got to look at the idea and say, okay, God, this is where it's at. But our problem as human beings is, okay, Lord, we'll trust you, but, where's it going to take me? And we come along with a lot of other questions. Well, yes, Lord, I'll do that, but just tell me, how is it going to turn out? I kind of like to know ahead of time, don't you? Or if not, at least come along and tell me why I've got to do this today. And we have a list of questions, and what really that says is we've not got trust. When we're looking back at these things, and we'll compare what's mentioned here, back to this idea of where, I think of the passage in Hebrews chapter 11. Not talking about Old Testament characters that did what they were supposed to do. By faith, they kept doing that. And he talked about this guy named Abraham. You probably read about him some. He went out, it says, going with the Lord, not knowing where he was going. The Lord said, just go, calling him in Genesis chapter 12. And so Abraham went, not knowing, the Hebrew author says, where it was going to be. We've always got these questions. God, I'll surrender, but where are we going? We get in the car with all the kids, and we tell them we're heading on vacation. Where are we going? Usually the question is, are we there yet? Just say yes. It could be anywhere. It could be down the street. They're happy about it. But this idea of where, and the question of how is it going to turn out? Exodus chapter 3. Moses, when he's coming before the Lord, and he wasn't excited about doing all this. He had no idea how all this was going to turn out. But God says, just follow me, and it will turn out. We've got to stop asking how it's going to turn out. I'm supposed to be out speaking to people and talking to people. I'm not talking as a minister. I'm talking out just as a Christian, like you and me. But I kind of like to know how it's going to turn out ahead of time. Are they going to be ugly with me? They're going to be upset? They're going to be cantankerous? Are they really going to like me after it's all over with? I want to know how. That means I'm not trusting. If I've got to keep getting answers to my questions. An idea of why? Oh, I don't know. I wonder if, no, actually, we know Genesis chapter 22, when Abraham again, after he finally was given that son he kept begging God for, back in Genesis 12. Now in 22, God says to him, I want you to take your son, your only son, the son you love, Isaac, And I want you to take him over here on this mountain. When you get there, I'll tell you, and offer him in a sacrifice. I just said, why is that going to help? What good is that? We always want to know why. God says, why don't you trust me? And just do it. See, our whole concept of surrendering takes the questions away, and it just puts it at the forefront of saying, trust. That God will take care of wherever you need to go, however it's supposed to turn out. He'll handle it and everything along the way. And maybe you'll figure out why. Maybe you'll never know, but there's a reason for it. That's why God's giving it to you. He's giving us what he needs. You surrender when? You might say, when God's purpose counts more than your purpose. That's surrender. When you look at the idea of the way Paul does in Galatians 2, chapter 2, verse 20. He says, I've been crucified with Christ. So he's surrendered himself. I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live now. It's Christ that lives in me. It's over with. It's not me anymore. God's purpose is above everything. And that's why Paul later on, when he's in prison, say, hey, this is going great for me. Everybody else scratching their head saying, yeah? Yeah, because now the whole guard gets to hear about the message of the gospel. I wouldn't have got that chance before. You see, his life is surrendered. Everything looks good if he looks at it through God's eyes. Because God will keep doing, through Paul, who surrendered to him, those things. You see. And you're surrendering when your brothers and sisters count more than you count. You look at things differently. Philippians chapter 2, there's a great extensive section there about Jesus and what he was willing to do. In addition to that, however, Paul writes about this concept of surrendering to one another. But I trust, Paul talking about this guy Timothy, I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly. He was a good worker. He'd been with Paul on a lot of missionary journeys, even sometimes when Paul was in prison. He was just a right-hand young man that did everything he needed. I trust to send Timothy to you shortly, that I also may be encouraged to know about your state. For I have no one like-minded who will sincerely care for your state. For all seek their own, and not the things which are of Christ Jesus. But you know his proven character, that as a son with his father, he served me in the gospel. And he talks about another guy named Epaphroditus that nearly died helping, because he counted being with those people more important. You see, this surrendering thing means we're going to be surrendering to each other. And that's the toughie, because not everybody does things the way we like them to be done. Sometimes they don't treat us the way we feel like we ought to get to be treated. But when my brothers and sisters, their spiritual life, their relationship, their growth spiritually, when all of that counts more than what I want, or I get to desire how good I look, or how famous I am, or anything else in there, then I surrender. And then God can use me. And he's desperately wanting to. He's wanting you to mount up on eagle's wings, but meanwhile, we've got to put God first and the brethren first, to surrender to Jesus in every way. And then we will walk. I heard a story some time ago. A fellow who was an amateur pianist, quite good, went to a concert. The guy that was playing was famed at that time the greatest ever. At the end, he just waited and waited and waited to get the chance to talk to the guy after it was over. The cloud cleared, and he goes up there and he just looked at me and goes, that was just fabulous. He said, I'd give my life to be able to play like that. The man looked back at him and said, I did. You see, that's the point. We don't realize it's a daily occurrence. We look at something great. I think, well, I give my life to it. Well, in order to get that, that's what it takes. Total surrender. This is my focus. This is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be God's man or God's woman. I'm going to do this and be that. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week when we described this idea of identity and how God has made us in His image, and then He's brought us back and He's bought us again, and so we belong to Him. And we get that focus in mind and we surrender ourselves to Him, then God will be able to do things with your family, with your kids, with your grandchildren, with your grandparents, or whoever it is. When, and only when, we just get rid of the excess baggage. And we dump it all out, and we just get up and think, oh man, I'm feeling like I can actually run now with the Lord. It's a daily practice. Think about it. A goal of a totally surrendered life to God, to the brethren, to the church, to each other, to your families. God deserves it. On that cross, Jesus surrendered everything. In that garden, He prayed, not my will, but yours be done, Lord. While the sweat was pouring out like blood from His system, and He was facing the worst thing in His life, He still surrendered. And now we need to too. Surrendered life. You got it? Would you like it? Would you like to say, I can mount up with wings like eagles? I would. Get at it daily. And if your life isn't right with God this morning, come down front right now. If you've never committed to Christ in baptism, surrender right now and keep putting off all whatever excuses you've given before and just step out and do it. Surrender. While we stand and say, please stand.